Well, we're coming up to the end of the year, and already it's time almost to start thinking about making some predictions for potential stuff that could happen next year. And one thing that we're going to talk about today, no doubt you've seen the title of the video already, is that the very first crisis of 2021 could be a food shortage. Yes, something that the Brexiteers have said could never happen, potentially, if the scenarios play out as are stated here, and could potentially happen because of what the Brexiteers are trying to do at the moment, we could be facing a food shortage for the first time since World War II. So, before we get into the article, please do remember to hit that like and share button. Also, remember down below there are my links to my Patreon page, as well as a one-off donation link should you like to support the channel that way. And thank you very much to the people that do so. And now, into the article. So this comes from The Guardian. And the title is, The British Government's First Disaster of 2021, a Food Shortage. A few days ago, I carried out a small experiment. I sent almost identical requests to two government departments. I asked the Businesses Department whether the UK holds strategic oil reserves. Yes, the UK keeps stocks equivalent to 90 days of net imports. And I asked the Environmental Department whether the UK holds strategic food reserves. No, they aren't necessary, because the UK has a highly resilient food supply chain. The government treats oil as a strategic asset, but food as a matter for the market. So, what happens if our highly resilient food supply chain breaks after Brexit? And especially the transition on the 1st of January. It won't, the government promised. Our risk assessments show that there will not be an overall shortage of food in the UK. Whether is or not, there's a deal. But when I pressed to show if these risk assessments had been carried out, the plural turned out to be misleading. There is only just one assessment, a reasonable worst-case scenario for the UK's borders. And this is grim enough. It suggests that the flow of freight through ports could be reduced between 20 to 40%, while trucks travelling the entire direction could be delayed up to 2 days. And that's a big problem for fresh food. This month, the National Audit Office reviewed the government's border alignments and found them to be late, untested, inherently complex, high risk and very challenging. The government's brinkmanship intended to wrong-foot the EU has instead wrong-footed our own hauliers and traders who have been unable to prepare with confidence. So far, so bad. But the UK's border is only one link to the food supply chain, and it may not be the weakest. If the ports are congested and the flow of goods gets reduced, we will need stocks to bridge the gap. Food traders will have to build reserves now and in December to cover the likely shortfall in January. This means warehouse capacity, but one minor hitch: there isn't any. Because of the shift to online sales caused by the pandemic and the need to store protective equipment, much of the spare capacity was mopped up before the second lockdown. Now, because non-essential shops are closed, plenty of stock is stuck in warehouses. Any remaining space has been swallowed by Christmas, tinsel, toys and turkeys. Good for the domestic market, and will have to compete for warehouse space with goods for export, as traders expect snarl-ups in both directions. And a survey by the UK Warehousing Association found that there is less than 3% spare capacity nationwide. Most of this consists of small corners, unless for major wholesalers. The association believes the situation will quickly become critical. While the government has spent over 1.4 billion this year on border arrangements that would usually be made by the private sector, it has done nothing to ensure that there is sufficient storage space or that food is prioritised. Such issues, it believes, are best left to businesses. But this confidence in the food industry is not shared by the industry itself. In October, the chair of Tesco warned of fresh food shortages for a few weeks, possibly even a few months after January. The UK imports 62% of its fresh food, much of it from Europe, and we rely on European trade for most of our onions, mushrooms, tomatoes and salad, and for a critical proportion many of the other vegetables and fruits. In the dead of winter, with trucks stuck at the border, possible tariffs, a weaker pound and no warehouse space, the price of fresh produce could go through the roof, if you can find it at all. Last year, before the transition deadline was extended, the government did conduct wider risk assessments. When they were leaked, however, we discovered that it foresaw potential consumer panic and food shortages. This year, though, the situation is greatly complicated by the pandemic. It seems to have decided that it's best not to ask. So, is the problem contained just to fresh food? With neither strategic food reserves nor a strategic risk assessment of warehouse capacity, I'm beginning to wonder. Without testing every link in the chain, the government has no grounds for dismissing the threat of an overall shortage. While it now seems almost certain that we will face a death of fresh fruit and vegetables, could there also be deficits of some kind of frozen or maybe even tinned and dried food as well? Already, thanks to the combination of austerity and the coronavirus, plenty of people in the UK struggle to afford a good diet. And according to the UN, a healthy diet costs 5 times as much as one that is merely adequate in terms of calories. The number of people using food banks this year has risen by nearly half. Any interruption of the supply chain will hit those in poverty first and worst. When the government was challenged on this issue in Parliament just last year, it claimed it was not responsible for the supply of food and drink to the population in an emergency. That is up to the industry. In other words, little has changed since the Irish famine of the 1840s and the Indian famine of the 1870s. It's the same reckless, uncaring attitude that has helped to kill over 50,000 people in the pandemic. And because we're leaving the single market and customs union, the disruption is likely to be brutal. Whether or not a deal is struck, if Brexit causes further economic rupture, the shops are half empty, and even food banks can't find enough supplies, the real prospect of chronic hunger is very real. But search as you may, you will never find one person in government who seems to give a damn. And that is a scary, scary prospect. That is a very scary prospect. But this is typical of the government's very, very short-sightedness. Once again, we have potential problem recognised and seen coming. The government is told about this problem and just says it's fine, only for this problem to become a potential crisis. This we have seen repeated throughout the pandemic over and over again. And not only just the pandemic, but we've seen this over the past 4 years with stuff regarding Brexit, mainly on stuff like the Irish border, to name just one of the things we've covered over the years. And so we could start next year in Britain being very, very hungry. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is an absolute catastrophe that is caused by Brexit. And remember, who is to blame? Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, Nigel Farage. When you are angry, any Brexiteer who might be watching this, even now or even next January, remember, it's not Remoaners like me you should be angry at. It's the Brexiteers who told you lies. So with that, please do remember to like and share this video. Also, down below, there are a link to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link. And if you can send food, you know, maybe next year, please do consider that. I can't believe I have to end the video like that. That's so depressing. That's really depressing. But you know, I've got to laugh sometimes. But yeah, we'll see you next time.